Imagine waking up tomorrow with no sense of who you are, no memories of your achievements, no concern for what others think of you, no drive to prove yourself. You'd still be conscious, still be alive, but would you still be you?
Welcome to Affectis,
where today we're diving into one of the most profound questions about human existence. Can we exist without an ego? Now, before you click away thinking this is going to be some spiritual mumbo-jumbo, stick with me, because what we're about to explore touches everything, from why you check your phone 50 times a day, to why breakups hurt so much, to whether true happiness is even possible. The ego. We've all heard the term. We know someone with a big ego, or we've been told to let go of our ego. But what actually is the ego? And more importantly, could you survive without it? Let's start with the basics. The ego isn't some evil demon living in your head. It's not inherently good or bad. Think of the ego as your psychological identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are. It's the voice in your head that says, I am smart, I am attractive, I am successful, or conversely, I'm not good enough. I always mess things up. Nobody understands me. The father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, described the ego as the mediator between our primal desires and the demands of reality. It's the part of your mind that navigates the real world, makes decisions, and protects your sense of self. But here's where it gets interesting. Your ego is essentially a construction. It's built from your experiences, your memories, your social interactions, and most importantly, your thoughts about yourself. Think about it this way. When you were born, you didn't have an ego. You didn't think, I am Sarah, or I am John. You didn't worry about your reputation or compare yourself to other babies. You simply existed. The ego developed over time as you learned language, formed memories, and began to distinguish yourself from the world around you. By the time you're an adult, your ego has become incredibly complex. It's not just, I am a person named X. It's, I am a person who went to this school, who has these talents, who succeeded here and failed there, who deserves this kind of treatment from others. Your ego is constantly working to maintain and protect this identity. When someone criticizes you, your ego feels threatened. When you accomplish something, your ego feels validated. When you scroll through social media and see someone living a life you wish you had, your ego suffers. And this is where the problems begin. Let's be honest, your ego can make you miserable. Consider how much of your suffering comes from ego-based thinking. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your ego is insulted. You don't get the promotion. Your ego feels diminished. Your partner criticizes something you did. Your ego goes into defense mode. You post a picture online and obsessively check for likes. Your ego is seeking validation. The ego creates a constant cycle of craving and aversion. It craves validation, success, admiration, and certainty. It avoids criticism, failure, embarrassment, and uncertainty. This creates an exhausting roller coaster where your happiness depends entirely on external circumstances that you can't fully control. But it gets deeper than that. The ego doesn't just react to the present, it's constantly dragging the past into every moment and projecting fears into the future. Maybe 15 years ago, someone rejected you. Your ego filed that away as evidence that I am unlovable or people always leave me. Now, in your current relationship, your ego is constantly on alert for signs of abandonment, creating problems that might not actually exist. Or perhaps you failed at something important once. Your ego turned that single event into a core identity. I am a failure. Now, whenever you face a new challenge, your ego whispers that you'll fail again, holding you back from even trying. The ego also creates separation. It draws a hard line between me and not me, between us and them. This is the root of so much conflict in relationships, in society, in the world. When your ego is heavily invested in being right, you can't truly listen to opposing viewpoints. When your ego needs to feel superior, you can't genuinely connect with others. Psychologists have observed that people with highly defensive egos, those who constantly need to protect and inflate their self-image, actually experience more anxiety, depression, and dissatisfaction with life. The constant effort to maintain a particular identity is exhausting. So if the ego causes so much suffering, why not just get rid of it? This is where things get really interesting and honestly, a bit weird to think about. Let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine your ego completely dissolved right now. What would that actually mean? First, you'd have no sense of personal history. The story of your life, your achievements, your traumas, your relationships would hold no emotional weight. You wouldn't feel pride or shame about your past. You wouldn't define yourself by what you've done or what's been done to you. Second, you'd have no concern for your reputation or social standing. What others think of you would be completely irrelevant. You wouldn't feel embarrassed, wouldn't seek approval, wouldn't compare yourself to anyone. Third, you'd have no attachment to outcomes. You could pursue goals without being identified with success or failure. You'd act, but you wouldn't be invested in results defining your worth. Fourth, you'd have no defensive reactions. Criticism wouldn't sting because there'd be no self to defend. Compliments wouldn't inflate you because there'd be no identity to validate. Now, does this sound liberating or does it sound terrifying? Maybe both. Some people describe ego-less states achieved through intense meditation or certain experiences as profound peace. Without the constant chatter of self-concern, there's a sense of pure presence, of simply being without needing to be anything in particular. There's a concept in psychology called flow state. You might know it as being in the zone. This happens when you're so absorbed in an activity that self-consciousness disappears. Musicians describe it, athletes experience it, even people doing everyday tasks can enter it. And here's what's fascinating. People consistently describe flow states as some of the most satisfying, meaningful experiences of their lives. In flow, you're functioning without ego. You're not worried about how you look or whether you're good enough. You're not dwelling on the past or anxious about the future. You're just doing, and it feels incredible. But here's the critical question. Could you live in that state permanently? Some argue yes, that enlightened individuals throughout history have achieved a state of egolessness and found it to be the ultimate form of human existence. They describe a consciousness that's aware but not identified, present but not possessive, engaged but not attached. But others point out something important. These people still have personalities. They still make decisions. They still interact with the world in ways that suggest some form of self-concept, even if it's fundamentally different from the average person's ego. Which brings us to a crucial distinction. Maybe the question isn't whether we can exist without any ego, but whether we can exist without being dominated by our ego. Here's a perspective that might reconcile this paradox. Perhaps what we need isn't the elimination of ego, but its transformation. Think of your ego like a tool rather than an identity. You need some sense of self to function in the world. You need to remember your name to respond when someone calls you. You need some self-concept to set boundaries, make plans, and navigate social situations. You need personal agency to get out of bed in the morning and pursue goals. The problem isn't having an ego, it's being enslaved by it. Consider the difference between these two statements. I am a failure, ego identified. I failed at this particular thing. Ego aware, but not identified. The first statement makes failure a core part of your identity. It's totalizing, permanent, and deeply painful. The second statement acknowledges what happened without making it who you are. It's specific, temporary, and much easier to work with. Or consider these: I am right and you are wrong. Ego identified. I see it this way, but I'm open to other perspectives. Ego aware, but not rigid. The first creates conflict and closes you off. The second allows for connection and growth. This is what psychologists call having a healthy ego, or a flexible self-concept. It's the ability to have a sense of identity without being rigidly attached to it, to have opinions without needing everyone to agree with them, to have goals without your entire worth depending on achieving them. People with flexible egos can accept criticism without feeling destroyed. They can celebrate others' success without feeling diminished. They can change their minds without feeling like they've betrayed themselves. They can fail without feeling like failures. They use their ego as a functional tool for navigating reality, but they're not imprisoned by it. There's also something called ego resilience in psychology, the ability to adapt your self-concept in response to experience without losing your core sense of self. People with high ego resilience recover faster from setbacks, adapt better to change, and generally experience better mental health. So maybe the answer to our question isn't binary. Maybe we can't exist without some form of ego, but we can exist without being controlled by it. So what does all this mean for your actual life? If you recognize that you've been living under the tyranny of an overactive ego, here are some practical ways to loosen its grip. First, practice observing your ego. Notice when you feel defensive. That's your ego feeling threatened. Notice when you compulsively compare yourself to others. That's your ego seeking validation. Simply noticing these patterns without judgment begins to create distance between your awareness and your ego. Second, question your self-stories. When you catch yourself thinking, I always, or I never, or I am the kind of person who, ask yourself, is that actually true, or is that just a story my ego tells? Most of our self-definitions are far more flexible than we think. Third, practice non-defensiveness. The next time someone criticizes you, try something radical. Don't defend yourself. Just listen. Consider if there's any truth to what they're saying. Notice how your ego reacts, but don't let it control the conversation. This is incredibly difficult, but profoundly liberating. Fourth, pursue activities that create flow states. Find things that absorb you so completely that self-consciousness disappears. This gives you regular experiences of what consciousness without ego feels like. Fifth, reduce social comparison. Limit social media. Stop measuring yourself against others' highlight reels. Focus on your own path. Your ego thrives on comparison. Starve it. Finally, hold your identity lightly. You can have goals, values, and preferences without being rigidly identified with them. You can change, grow, and evolve without feeling like you're betraying your true self. So can we exist without an ego? The answer seems to be not entirely, but we can exist without being enslaved by it. You need some sense of self to function in the world, but that sense of self doesn't have to be rigid, defensive, and constantly seeking validation. It can be flexible, open, and at peace with itself. The goal isn't to destroy your ego, but to see through it, to recognize it as a useful construct rather than who you fundamentally are. When you can do that, you maintain functionality while gaining freedom. You stop taking everything so personally. You stop basing your worth on external validation. You stop defending a fixed image of yourself and start experiencing life more directly. And ironically, when you stop trying so hard to be somebody, you often discover a more authentic version of yourself than your ego ever created. Thanks for watching Imagine This. If this video made you think differently about yourself, or made you realize you might not be who you think you are, hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the big questions. And leave a comment. What's one way your ego controls you that you'd like to change?